All right, we last left off on republic, and so this is where things are going to get a little bit more complicated on our types of government. So a lot of people have always asked me, as a social studies teacher, are we a republic or are we a democracy? Let's see. A democracy, there's two forms. It breaks down. Demo is people, people rule. All right, so direct democracy is one form, and an indirect democracy is the other form. So a direct democracy is where every single person goes and they vote every single time on every single potential law. So every single time your government wanted to make a change or do something to react to some event going on, everybody would get up and they would physically go to a polling place where you place your vote, and they would go vote on it. And you have to be knowledgeable about it too. You can't just go vote and just yes, no. You actually are supposed to know about the law. Know what you're voting on. Know what the consequences are for it. Okay, good, bad, everything in between. So when you think about the United States and you think about the size of our country today, it's a lot of people. And maybe a direct democracy wouldn't work all the time. Or maybe it wouldn't work at all. I don't know. You make the decision. Every single person would be responsible for this. And not that everybody votes, because we don't even crack 60% of voting in a presidential election year. But when you look at people voting all the time, this would be very time consuming. You would not be able to necessarily get immediate responses to things that you need. Like if there's a hurricane, you live in North Carolina, if there's a hurricane, you would have to go and try and set up voting and try and get people to vote immediately on it. So maybe this works better in smaller areas. So when you look at way back long ago, we look at the Pilgrims coming here, and the Pilgrims were on the Mayflower, and so they created the Mayflower Compact. And what they decided was one man, one vote. And it literally was only men and men of the church who could vote. But what they decided to do was every single time they were going to vote on what was best for the community. And that's actually what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to vote on what's not best for you, but what's best for everybody. Kind of like what JFK said, ask not what you could do, but what your country, All right, so that's similar to what you're supposed to do with a direct democracy. You're supposed to vote on what's best for everybody every single time. Now let's look at what an indirect democracy is. Indirect, or representative democracy, a republic, people are going to elect representatives, legislators. These are the people who actually make your laws. And these people are then going to read up on all those laws. They're going to know everything about the laws. They're going to be able to answer your questions. And they're going to vote on what's best for you and me. When you think about everything about your daily life, would you be able to sit down every single night and read a 10-page, 100-page potential law? Would you understand all the language in it? It's a lot of lawyer kind of stuff. That's why a lot of people who do work in our legislative branch, our Congress, have law degrees. A lot of legal stuff when it comes to laws, because it's the law. So in these kind of countries, people decide that it would be best to pay people to run the government while they go and do whatever they want. Like, you want to be a doctor, you don't necessarily want to be reading 200 pages of bills every single night just for the country. So what people decide to do in these kind of countries is they will create a legislative branch that will make the laws, and those are the people who are going to be well informed of the laws. They'll know the consequences of the laws, and they're going to do what's best every single time for everybody in the country. Now, if they don't, the voters, the people who elected them, vote them out. When we are going to talk about like what influences our government, one of the things we're going to look at is the House of Burgesses, just like we're going to look at the Mayflower Compact. So back there, long time ago, in Jamestown, Virginia, it's a colony. They are going to create this legislative government. It's an indirect democracy. They're going to elect people who are going to do the 9 to 5 job of running the government for them. When you remember all the way back then in the 1700s, most of the colonists are farmers. And in Virginia, they're plantation owners. So they don't live in a city. They actually live far outside of that stuff, because when you're looking at like Thomas Jefferson and you look at how big his plantation is, and you look at how many enslaved people the man kept, they don't go into town a whole lot. There's a lot of reasons for that. I think you can figure out some of those reasons. But in a democracy, you have 2 forms. And the United States is technically an indirect or representative democracy. We decided that this was the best form, because people aren't going to every single day read every single law that's going to be created. It doesn't really work. And it's not really going to work because we have to do other things. We keep the economy running by having doctors, by having lawyers, by having teachers, by having people who are creating items for you and me to buy, to consume. So when you look at the forms of government that are out there, the founding fathers decided that this was the style that they liked. But it's also the one they're very familiar with. They have this form of government in England. They have Parliament, and Parliament was very much a legislative branch. They were making the laws for them. It's just they had some issues on what that voting and who should vote looked like. An oligarchy is where a few people rule or groups rule. So in an oligarchy, you guys studied it back there in world history, and you studied it like with ancient Sparta. And I know you guys know 300, right? Good. Make the connection. All right, in the movie or comic book or whatever, you got the military people, you got the government people, and then you had the priests, the religious groups. They ruled ancient Sparta. That's what an oligarchy is. So you have the military, who will help rule. You have aristocracy, and aristocracy are these fancy families. They have power, they have all the land, they have all the money because they have all the land, they have the resources. And you have a religious group, which we call a clergy or theocracy. And so in an oligarchy, you got these 3 groups who have concentrated power, and they run the country or they run the area. And that's an oligarchy. The next form of government we're going to look at is a theocracy. A theocracy is where religious leaders run the government. You have theocracies around the world today. Matter of fact, we even had them here in the colonial America. Like the Mayflower Compact, the Pilgrims, it was church leaders, church men who voted. That's a theocracy. It just happened to be a direct democracy theocracy, okay? But you also still have theocracies like Vatican City in Rome. So Catholic people who are Catholic, they're Christian, they follow the Pope. He's the head of the Catholic Church. And where the Pope lives and resides and rules is in Vatican City. And technically Vatican City really isn't in Italy, really isn't in Rome. When you go to, if you ever do get to go to Rome, go to the Vatican City, once you step inside that area, that is the jurisdiction, the rule of the Pope and the Catholic Church. Can't do anything you want there just because that's their city, their area. They run it. Same thing like in a lot of Middle Eastern countries. A lot of Middle Eastern countries are theocracies. Their religion is not separated from their government. They don't do that in a lot of different countries, okay? So in like Iran, the Quran, the book that the Muslims follow, is very much their government. So they operate and run from that kind of government. The last government we're going to talk about is no government, and it's what we call anarchy. So there is no government in charge. There's no rules, there's no laws. You guys a lot of times think of the purge, and that's fine. That is what the purge is, the night of the purge. It's anarchy. Anything goes. And when you think of the purge and you think of that anything goes, who's the most vulnerable during those things? Who's most at risk? When you think of anarchy, what happens a lot of times is there's been a lot of war, and because there's been war, there's no real government to establish order, and because there's no order, most of your people who are very vulnerable would be the ones who get targeted and who get hurt. After like World War I, World War II, you had anarchy in cities, you had riots, you just no order, no law. But you still have countries that have anarchy. The government might be there, but they're not in power, really. They're not in charge. They can't control the area. So anarchy might sound fun and it makes for maybe a good movie, but it's a horrible thing that actually happens because it is your elderly, it is your poor people, it is your children who really suffer in areas that are like this. So no law, no order, just chaos.